Hello. What is up, YouTube and Twitch? It is day 2 of our Advent of Code challenge. This is a Christmas set of challenges from the Advent of Code website. I'll be sending in the chat now. Oh, 1 second. I've got my Twitch open. Bad Joe. I did that yesterday as well. Okay, so those of you that weren't here yesterday, we're going to be going through these Christmas themed challenges, and I'm going to try and explain everything as if as if you've never coded before, or if you're very new to Python. So I might repeat some stuff on even, what is a variable, what is a function, stuff like that. So it might be a bit repetitive if you're very confident in Python, but if you're in that sort of stage where, you spent those first 6 hours following a tutorial, or, you're not really sure what to do next, I think Advent of Code is a good sort of fun way to push yourself to do something a little bit more techy that doesn't require you to start pulling in web development and these other things. So yeah, I didn't think there's anything else I've got to say, so I'm gonna just get on with day 2. So day 2, password philosophy. Your flight departs in a few days from the coastal airport. The easiest way down to the coast from here is via toboggan. I don't know why I can click this. Oh, okay. If you don't know what a toboggan is, I'll just send this in the chat. Via toboggan. The shopkeeper at the North Pole Toboggan rental shop is having a bad day. Something's wrong with our computers. We can't log in. You ask if you can take a look. Their password database seems to be a little corrupted. Some of the passwords wouldn't have been allowed by the official Toboggan corporate policy that was in effect when they were chosen. To try to debug the problem, they have created a list, my puzzle input, of passwords according to the corrupted database and the corporate policy when that password was set. For example, if you have the following list, 13A, okay, don't know what that means. Each line gives the password policy and then the password. So, if I got my puzzle input. Each line gives a password policy and the password. The password policy indicates the lowest and highest number of times a given letter must appear for the password to be valid. So 1-3A means the password must contain A at least 1 time and at most 3 times. In the above example, two passwords are valid. The middle password is not. It contains no instance of B, but needs at least 1. The first and third passwords are valid because they contain 1A or 9C, both within the limits of their respective policies. How many passwords are valid in our list? So for this one, the answer will be 2. So again, same as before, I'm going to take that as our test input. And this is all we'll work with for now. I'm going to very quickly probably have to look at reading that in from a file, because we're going to have to do some processing here. I've got that test input, and I'm going to copy maybe just this bit as a little reminder of the prompt. And I'm pressing Control// there to comment out. So in Python, just putting a hashtag will make this commented out. If we don't have those hashtags, as we did yesterday, if we run, we'll probably get some errors. So it's good to comment out anything that's sort of a plain English instruction for yourself. Okay, so this one's a bit more abstract, a bit trickier to break down. What I'm probably going to do is, instead of trying to look at all of this at once, I'm thinking we're going to need some sort of function that's probably going to take these 4 inputs. So each password is going to be valid based on, I guess, a lower bound, an upper bound, bound 3, a character, just call it char, and a password. And we're looking to return whether this is valid or not. So I'm looking for true or false. In this case, A, B, C, D, E. And we want to return a true or false. Return true if valid. So loads of stuff to go into there. How should we do this? So to start with, I'm going to talk about maybe the notion of variables. So all I've done here is I've given some sort of friendly names that are going to refer to these values for us. So in Python, the way I would sort of normally describe a variable is if you imagine if you were moving houses, you might pack up a box and you might put all of your kitchen related stuff inside a box, and on the outside you might write kitchen on it, so that even though you've not opened that box, you know what that value is, you can sort of refer to it easily. You're not saying, give me the box that has 10 plates in it, 6 knives and forks, like all that kind of stuff. You just say, give me the kitchen box, because I need to take it to the kitchen. Variables are kind of similar, so we have a sort of friendly name, so you can kind of imagine we've got this name on the front, lower bound or password, and then inside that box we have any data basically. So it could just be a number, it could be a string, so in this case it would be a string containing the text A, B, C, D, E, but it could be something really complicated. It could be a massive, nested object that's an entire profile of a student, and it's got all of the details on their teachers and stuff like that. It could be something quite big, but generally in these sort of smaller problems, we keep them nice and small. So we're going to have these variables here. In fact, I can uncomment these, and if I do Control D, I can find duplicates, and I can just replace those with an equals. So the char is not a string, so we need quotes for strings. So these are our 4 variables we're going to need for the first run. What can we talk about here? So yeah, I've not mentioned today, these equal signs are used for assignment. So you could kind of imagine, and in some other languages like R, they use an arrow instead. So it's sort of like putting that number 1 into that variable box that we've written lower bound on. In Python specifically, we use equals, and a lot of languages use equals. These numbers, we can just write numbers, and Python infers that they are numbers. So anything we do with these 2 variables will be treated as if they're numbers. So we could do lower bound plus up bound. I should call it upper bound maybe. Up bound will return 4. That should be big enough to see, I think. Zoom in a little bit more. Okay, so we can do sort of basic maths in Python, and we can do that with those variables. Now the next one, we've got this char, and when we print that out, you'll see there's quotes around it. So this is how Python denotes strings. So there's a difference between a 0 in quotes and a 0 just as a 0, and that difference is that Python is inferring that first one as a string 0 and the second one as a number 0. So if we do 0 plus 0, we'll get 0. That's the maths we kind of expect in the real world. But if we do the string 0 plus the string 0, we get 0, 0 as a string. So it doesn't really make any sense in a mathsy world, but that can be really useful if we want to sort of concatenate strings together, if we want to build up an example email or a username for a user, and we've got their names as separate variables. That might come in handy in this exercise, just because we're going to definitely be dealing with strings here. In fact, we're even going to need to be able to process these as a string to pull out these numbers and these letters here. So we're going to have to do a little bit of sort of processing of these strings as they come in, but let's not worry about that for now, because it's very easy for me to sort of like climb up all these levels and break it down. All I'm going to do now is write a function that will take these and just return true or false. So I'm not caring about this string, I'm not caring about dealing with multiple lines, none of that. So how are we going to do this? I guess I need something that's going to let me count the number of values in a string, and we know which value we're looking for there. So what can we do here? I'd probably iterate over this as a string. So we can do for character, let's not use character because we got that, for letter in password, and then we can just print that letter. So that will print them out line by line. So what we can do is a sort of very basic counting pattern here. I'm very confident that there's going to be a function already that's going to count these values for me. So I'm a little concerned about that, but I think I'll give this a go first, and then I'll come back to that later. So for letter in password, so this is a for loop. We have to put colon at the end, and Python requires these tab indents after any of these sort of keywords like for, if, def, anything like that. And letter, what this is doing is letter is a variable that's going to iterate over this string password. So letter is going to be set to the letter A, then it's going to print that letter, then it's going to be B, it's going to print that letter, C, it's going to print that letter, and it'll continue. So when I run it, we should just get A, B, C, D, E, which is good because now we can start counting. Now we've kind of got a bonus here because we know we're counting a particular character, so we can have a count char count maybe. So this will count the number of times we've encountered our letter. It's always going to be set to 0 before we run our code. And then we're going to have to, instead of printing, we're going to have to say if letter is equal to char. I've done a lot there. I'll come back to it in a second. Then we're going to increment our char count, which means we're going to do char count equals char count plus 1. So that should print char count. That should give us 1, and then we're going to have to convert that to a true or false if it's within our lower and upper bound, which it is. So maybe I'll do that on another line. Lower bound is less than or equal to char count is less than or equal to upper bound. Cool. So we got true for that one. Okay, I've just done loads of stuff there, so I'm going to really break that down. So char count, this is a variable for storing a count, I suppose. So we talked about that before. That's a variable. It's holding 0. Next, we've got this for loop. Iterate over letters in a string, which in this case is our password A, B, C, D, E. So this will iterate over A, B, C, D, E, and that will be assigned to the letter each time this loop runs. Next, we've got an if statement. We've not talked about this before, but you might have heard about it, or if you're new to any programming language, hopefully you've heard about an if statement. This is sort of our first selection tool, selection something. I don't know how to describe that. Basically, we can create sort of routes through our program. So we could say, if this thing is true, we do this. Otherwise, we do this, or otherwise we check this. So an example right now, I might say I teach a lot of very small children. So this is the example I normally use. When your teacher touches his nose, the students rub their head. When the teacher isn't touching the nose, the students touch their ears. And this can just be a good way to sort of recognize that, one of those parts happen and the other doesn't. So you can practice now if you're watching. So you should be rubbing your head now. And then when I take it off, you should be touching your ears. So that's kind of if statements. And there's a bit more we can do there. There's something called an elif in Python, which is where we can add another condition. And there's an else, which takes the opposite of the condition or the not of whatever we did. So in this case, I've said letter equals char. So char is our letter A there. And our letter is whatever stage of this password we're at. So A, B, C, D, or E. So if we print that out each time, I'll keep printing the letter actually because it'll just make it a bit easier to see at this point. So it'll print out all those letters, it'll print out the number of times we count an A, and it'll print out whether that's within our bounds or not. So yeah, I've not talked about that equals sign. So as we've seen before, we use the equals sign for assignment. So the equals sign is used to compare two things. So in English we might say, this thing is equal to another thing. Is 2 + 2 = 4 would evaluate to true. And in this case, if we're saying if this is true, then we run this code. So if this letter is equal to the character we're looking for, we run this code below, which will increment our character counter. So if this letter is the character we look for, then increment our counter. And then again, we've got something really weird here. So char count equals char count plus 1. Now, our maths brain's going to say, hey, that's not correct. But that's because we're thinking about equals. So what we're doing here is we're reassigning the char count to be equal to the char count plus 1. So in English, we might just say we're incrementing this value, but we're definitely not saying, 2 is equal to 2 + 1. we're saying our new score. A good example, for example, if it's your birthday, your age yesterday might have been 25, but your age today is 25 plus 1. So it's incrementing. It's sort of reassigning a global variable like your birthday and age and stuff like that. Okay, so that's going to work with our test case here, so that's all good. Let's wrap this up in a function so that we can pass those values in. So instead, how am I going to do this? So we're going to use def to define a function. I'm going to call it, I don't know, isValid, and then that will take a password. Should I do it that way? IsValid password. I'll do it the order I written before. So isValid lower bound. I'm just going to call it lower actually. Lower, upper, char to find, and password. And then, as I said, with for loops, with if statements, with def, we're going to use this colon at the end to indicate that we're sort of entering a local scope. Def is short for define, if you're interested, as in we're defining a function. And in here, we're basically going to indent everything we already had here. So now this is all part of that function. We're going to have to change some things because I've changed some names. So I've got lower, low's all the way out here actually. We're not even, I'm not returning anything either. Upper, char to find is our new char, and password is still password, so that's all good. And I'm going to return just true or false from this now. So outside all of that for loop indentation, I'm going to return this condition here. Return if the count is within bounds. Cool. So now I've got this big isValid function, and what I can do is I can call that using isValid open brackets to call any function. So we've done that before with our print function here. We open those round brackets, but when we define our own, we also need to do that. So if we just run, well, we don't run it. If we just call isValid as the function, it'll return where that function is on our machine or something like that. So that's not what we want to do. Instead, we want to do this open brackets, and you can see REPL.it is already prompting us. That's just reminded me I'm going to share this code in the chat on Twitch. So it's reminding us we need a lower number, upper number, character to find, and a password, which we have here. So that's 13A and ABCDE, not an F. Okay, cool. So we got that first test case. I'm now going to move this test case down a bit just to keep it all together with what we're doing, because we won't be using this forever. So now that will return true. It won't print anything out. Let's tidy up a little bit so we don't need those letters. So now it shouldn't print anything. It's taking a little bit of time. I'm just going to print the password while I'm at it. Print checking validity. Oh dear. Okay. Oh, that shouldn't be in the for loop. So outside the for loop, I'm going to print checking the validity of that password, and that will just print the password once, and it should tell us true or false, but it's not. That's because I haven't printed that true or false at the end. So there we go. Checking validity of ABCDE, true. So if I change this here to not have that A, it should be false. And if I have 4 A's, it should be false as well. Cool, but 3 A's should be good. True. Nice. Fantastic work, Joe. Okay, what next? So next, our input isn't actually, our input isn't in such a nice form for us. We're actually getting this as our input, so a string like this. So we need another function that's going to go through that and try and find these individual parts of the string. Okay. Now I think we'll be safe to assume, what can we do here? looks like we're safe to assume that the password starts immediately after the colon. There might be a space there, but we're not counting for space characters, so that should be okay. Okay, so I'm just going to try something. So there's a really useful function we can use here called split. And split will split that into a list, which I've also not described. So a list is denoted with these square brackets, and it has comma-separated values that we can access and iterate over individually like we just did with our for loop. So actually, rather usefully, split by default will split on any spaces in a string. So in this case, it'll get rid of that space and that space. It'll leave us with the password in our final element, final index. We'll have the character we're looking for, but it has this colon that we don't need. And then we have this 1, 3, which is our lower and upper, which we could split again. So if we had 1-3 and we call split, we can actually pass split a character to split on. In this case, is that hyphen, and so that gets us those numbers. So this is looking doable. It's going to look a little bit messy, but let's go with another function. So def, let's call it what should we call this? I don't know. Get. I'm just going to call it like process input or something like that. Process input, and that's going to take one string, which is going to be our input. Maybe no, that's okay with input. Some words like input and string are like maybe generally don't use, just because they can sort of overwrite the actual input elements of Python and the string variable and type of Python. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is it's a little bit tricky because I don't want to return like 4 variables back up. So I could just call isValid from within this function, then I won't have to deal with that. So first I'm going to do is split input, which is going to be our input.split. And as we've seen before, that's going to have, let's write these down as comments actually. So we start with this, and then splitting it once is going to give us this. No, it's not. It's going to give us this. And so that's our password already, so we can straight up grab that one, which is cool. So that's split input. Again, we're looking at indexing here. So in Python lists, we access these values using their index. So while in English we'd say this is the first element of this list, this is the second element of this list, this is the third element of this list. In Python we say this is sort of the 0th index, so we would access that first element using 0. So we would say in here, we would say split input 0 would get us that 1, 3. So that's 0, this is 1, this is 2. So we've got our password already, so that's good. Next we want just the first character of the second one is our character, so char equals split input 1, and then I'm going to use something called slice notation to get the first character. Actually, no, I'm not. So because each string is also a list, I can get the first character of that list using 0. So what I've done there is I've got the first element of this array, the index 1 element of this array, which is a string a colon. Then I'm getting the first character of that string, which is a. So I think I've got char now, and then lower, well, I'm going to get, so I'm going to say bounds is equal to split input 0. So that's this first one here, 1-1, and then I'm going to split that, split on the hyphen, so that's got our bounds, and then I can say lower equals bounds 0, upper equals bounds 1. Okay, I'm just going to reorganize these because there's a bit of logic left there, and I think we can sort of tidy this up. Def then is there anything else I can do to make this a bit nicer? So I'm going to have all these inputs. So from here, I'm going to call isValid straight away. And I can just pass those. So what was it? Lower, upper, char, password. Cool. So I'm just going to write some notes on here so it makes a bit more sense. So get the third element of our list. Get the first character of the first element of our list. Get the first element of our bounds. Get the second element of our bounds. So lots of comments there, but I think without it, it's not going to make much sense to people who see this code later. Slightly concerned that obviously each of these Advent of Code challenges has two parts to them. The first part is usually quite easy, and then the second part is often sort of like a little sneaky trick where they go, ah, you thought you could cut this corner? Well, I guess you can't cut this corner. So I'm expecting something like, you know, oh, instead of one character requirement, there's going to be two character requirements, and this is going to mess up everything we've done. But let's see how we get on. And then call our isValid function. So now, wow, we've got a lot of code. We've got these two functions, and instead of calling isValid like this, we're going to instead call print process input. Oh, process. Oh no, I can't do that there. That's why it's complaining. So your functions have to be defined before you call them. So down here I should be able to get process input, and our input is going to be this string here. And that should still be true. Oh no. Okay. I need a second there. So let's see what we're looking for. Less than or equals is not supported between instances of string and integers. So I know what's going on here. So what we've done is, because now we're splitting this string instead of controlling those integers, whereas before I could safely assume lower and upper were numbers, so we had them as 1 and 3. They're now 1 in quotes and 3 in quotes. So all that means is we need to convert them to integers. So if we have a 1 like this, that's a string, and there's actually a type function that can tell us if something's a string or not, so that's a string. Now, we've not actually talked about this, but the types in Python, so for numbers, there's one called integer. You might not have heard that before, but that refers to any whole number. So 0, 1, -1 are all integers. 1.5, for example, is not an integer. So in Python, that's called a float, and that refers to sort of the floating point decimal that can sort of move about through the number. So what we're looking for here is a way to convert this 1 into 1. And handily, there's something called casting, which is where you convert one type into another type. So in this case, if we do int, pass it the string 1 as a parameter, 1 as a string, that will return 1 as an integer, which is exactly what we want. So all I'm going to do here is wrap these bounds in an int function, and that should convert them to numbers for us. Again, we made a lot of assumptions here, and I'm expecting to be punished for it. None. I didn't return anything. Phew. So functions, you don't have to return something. You could just have loads of print statements in here, but I prefer to have most, well, by definition, a function returns something. But I sort of prefer to, you know, return it out and print out there, so we sort of keep things encapsulated. So now it should be true. Phew. Okay. Still true with 3 A's. False with 4 A's, and no A's should also be false. I guess we could test this in like many ways now. So we could try putting Z here. It's false because there's no Z, 2 Z's. Yeah, that looks good to me. So we're almost at a point where we can just run this on our 3 test cases here. Let's just give that a try actually. So I can do, I'm going to duplicate this 2 more times. I'm going to pass in. And remember, we're looking for the number of valid passwords as our answer here. So there's still a little bit more logic we need to do. But that should be, what was it, true, false, true. Need to go read. True, false, true. Cool. Okay, so our answer here would be 2, right? So we need to sum these up somehow. So what I'm going to do is make another list, and I'm going to put these values in that list, and then use that for loop and that counter pattern to iterate over it again. So that counter pattern is just is timeless. You'll use it over and over again. I'm sure there's a little function that'll let me do that, or I could use sort of like a Python reduce or something like that to do the same thing. But let's leave it simple for now, because I feel like we're not going to get very far if I try to explain reducing. Yeah, I'm not going to do it. For input in inputs, and again, this will print each of those if I refer to that input variable, so it'll get one of these at a time. So I'm just going to run it so we can see. So there's those strings, and I can just call print process input, and then input. And what that'll do is run them all. And we need a little bit more than that because we want to return these true or falses. I think you can add trues together. Yes, you can. So true and false, sort of behind the screen, true is actually equal to 1, and false is equal to 0. So you can actually add these up together. Oh, that freaked me out. I was like, that's not true. So we could do like true plus false, and we would get 2. So that's kind of a useful trick. Again, this is sort of casting these Boolean. I've not even defined what Boolean is. A Boolean is a variable type that is true or false, but those true or falses. So true is a 1, false is a 0, and these are used for all our conditions and our if statements and stuff. So what we can do is we can have another counter. We already got a counter somewhere. Now that should be good. Okay, so valid password count is 0. And what I'm going to do in here is I'm going to say valid password count equals valid password count plus whatever true or false value we get back from here. And then outside of that loop, I'm going to print valid password count. And there we go, we get true. Why is it printing that twice? Because I'm calling it twice. Groovy. Can I do any more there? I guess I could print. If I print this at the end, then I can use the sort of the knowledge of, so I can say password is, and then I can use this condition here as well. So is valid equal, oh, let's not do that. I'll just call it valid for now. And then I can use that in here. So I can do valid, and that needs to be unindented. What can I do there? I don't really want to write an if statement here, so I'll just leave it like that for now. But we could make that a bit more readable later. Okay, and we've got our answer 2. Total valid passwords, valid password count. Nice, so we've got the correct answer there for 2. There's a little bit more work to do because our big, oh my gosh, we've got a huge password list here. And I can't really just, copy and paste them one at a time into here. I'm going to have to do a bit more than that. Let's see. So yeah, same as what I Googled yesterday, really. Read file line by line Python. I Googled this last time as well. Yeah, this one's good, and I used this to get rid of the new lines. So what we can do in our REPL is I minimized it over here, but we can have extra files. So we can do inputs.txt, and in here we're going to put those 3 inputs, and we also need to read that file in. So I feel like I've used inputs already, so maybe I'll just leave it as lines for now. This file name needs to be inputs.txt. So now if I run that and I do lines, there should be nothing because we haven't given it any lines. Put those in there, get rid of those comments, and now we should have a variable lines. Oh no, there's nothing there. Oh, I didn't print lines. There we go. So that's pretty much exactly what we needed for this inputs. Oh cool, we can use inputs then. So I can get rid of that, call this inputs, delete all this, we don't care about that anymore. Didn't care about that anymore. So this is basically our main program running here, but it's making use of everything else we've done above. There we go, total valid password is 2. So it looks like we passed our test case, which means we should be able to just Control A, copy all of this, put it in our inputs, and as long as there's, we haven't made too many assumptions, we haven't missed anything, this should do. Cool, so we got 628 valid pass. Oh, you can't see because of my face. How about that? 628 valid passwords right there. Hey Matt, thanks for joining. Don't worry, we're only halfway done. And yes, happy birthday. It's my birthday, I'm 26. So we're only halfway done here anyway. We've only done the first half of the challenge. So 628 is my answer. I've been very confident that we're done. We might not actually be. I might have made some mistakes. 628. Boom! That's the right answer. I need some sort of like celebration animation that I'm going to play. I'm going to add that to my to-dos actually. So whenever I get a star, we do a little celebration animation. Celebration animation. Cool, so we're halfway there. Now we get to see what the second part of the problem is. So part 2, while it appears you validated the passwords correctly, they don't seem to be what the official Toboggan corporate authentication system is expecting. The shopkeeper suddenly realizes that he just accidentally explained the password policy rules from his old job at the sled rental place down the street. The official Toboggan corporate policy actually works a little differently. Each policy actually describes the 2 positions in the password. Oh no, where 1 means the first character, 2 means the second character, and so on. And have no concept of index 0. Okay. Exactly one of these positions must contain the given letter. Other occurrences of the letter are irrelevant for the purpose of policy enforcement. So does that mean... Okay, well, let's see what it means in below. So this is valid. Position 1 contains an A and position 3 does not. Huh? Oh, okay, 2 positions. So it's not a range. We're literally checking if the first position is that character and the second position is that character. Okay, so our input is probably the same, but let's go back to those test inputs so we can get rid of that for a second, and we're going to need to change. Processing our input, thankfully, is the same, but lower bound is going to be like position 1. But for the purpose of our function, we're not really going to care about that anyway. We can kind of make use of that. So part 2, we've got these test cases again, and I'm going to revert this back to our older test case. Okay, and then instead of valid password count, why do I even call my function? Process input, there we go. So process input, we're going to have to basically rewrite for this. Oh no, we're not. Is valid, we're going to have to rewrite here. So I'm going to make a new one called isValid2 for part 2. I'm going to call it position 1 for our first variable, position 2, char2 find, and password. And what we need here is that exactly one of these 2 positions must contain what we're looking for. So this one is invalid because the second value and the 9th value are 9. So only one of them can be our character. So we can use that sort of, I guess we can check if it's position 1, check if it's position 2, and add those together, like we just did with our true and false maths. And if we, okay, we can do this. So it is valid 2, and I'm gonna basically, don't really care about char count anymore, but we're still gonna do a 4-letter in password. No, we're not gonna do that. So we're gonna check what position 1 is in our password. So position 1 is equal to password. So when it says 1, it wants the first character, which means that we need to use, oh, we can't use this. Char1 is going to be the, so if it was a 1, we'd be getting the 0th index, so we need to do position 1 minus 1 to get that. Char2 equals password position 2 minus 1. And for now, I'm going to print these out because I'm aware I'm very close to confusing myself here. So I'm going to, or is valid 2 function. So this is where we're going to change it if we want to flip between part 1 and part 2. Oh no. Unsupported. Line 56, it says, is our problem. And that's just a problem because we're just trying to actually do something, which let's just leave that for now. So we're just going to call the function O inputs. Process input. Why is that complaining? Oh dear. I don't know. I just made, oh, donation. I'm not sure, I've not got my stream, I'm not listening to my stream, so it might, if Streamlabs is still set up, there should be a donation thing that appears and like makes a funny noise. But I don't know, I can't hear it at the moment. Gosh, I'm kind of stumped here, something weird has happened. So it says one of these is, so valid password is 0, process input doesn't return anything, that's why. So here for now, let's just return true, and it'll just count everything as true. There we go. So it's getting our first, well, it's getting the position 1 and position 2 character. Now that's true if only one of them is our character to find. So I need to check if this is equal to our character to find. And that will give me true or false. True, false. So we're looking for our cases where only one is true, which is just the first one, I think. Invalid, valid, yeah, cool. So we can return, basically we want to check if char1 plus char2 is equal to 1. Anything else we don't care about. So we can actually return that. That seems too easy. Okay, well that's given me the correct answer there, so let me just write a note to myself here because this is looking kind of confusing. So check if the character at position 1 is the character we are looking for. And then this is what we call an XOR in Boolean algebra, so only if one is true and the other is false. So if they're both true, we don't care. XOR these chars, and I think we might be in a place where we can try and answer it. So that's all good for that first part. That's all good, so we should just be able to turn this back to our full answer set. And it says 705. I don't know if I should print something just to see if... Let's print some stuff in here, just so we can check what we're comparing. So let's print the password, and char 1, char 2. That's not really going to be too useful, but let's see. Char 1, char 2. Okay. I'm somewhat convinced. Let's go 705. Let's see what happens. Boom. There we go again. That's 2 stars. Day 2 completed. Again, we've come under time because I'm giving myself an hour to do these each day. We still had 15 minutes left. Fantastic stuff. So yeah, my code, it'll be in, if you're watching on YouTube, it'll be in the YouTube description. It'll be on the Twitch stream. It'll be on all sorts of stuff. So there's the code. And yeah, that's everything. So well done. Good work all. Thanks for helping me in the chat. And I'll see you tomorrow, I suppose. I mean, today's my birthday. I'm aiming to do these at 11 AM every day. But, you know, if something happens, you know, the advent of code can wait. But yeah, I'll try to do 1 a day-ish. Not sure what's going to happen on the weekend, but let's see. And now roll that post-event screen.